Okay, there we go. Thank you, Virginia. Okay, welcome everyone, and welcome Virginia Gamba. I have some words I want to share first before we get started. So I want to welcome everyone, including those of you online and those of you watching through our live stream, to our conversation with Virginia Gamba. My name is Larry Friedenberg. I'm Assistant Professor of Sociology and Human Services here at Laurel Ridge Community College. And today's program, I believe, reinforces our college commitment to nurturing diversity and enriching our community, and supports the mission of our Engage 2027 strategic plan to provide a positive, caring, and dynamic learning environment that inspires student success, values diversity, and promotes community vitality. For our conversation with Virginia Gamba today, we'll keep it informal, as informal as we can, hoping we can learn much about Ms. Gamba's journey in peace building and security. We might learn how all this started for Ms. Gamba, how she became involved with the Pugwash conferences and nuclear disarmament, and how she came to work passionately at the United Nations. I'm hoping we have time, and we've talked about this before. We'll have some time for questions and answers, because some of you, or many of you, offered some really interesting and unique questions for Virginia. I do want to say this all came about several months ago when Laurel Ridge alumni Jason Hatch, who's in the seating here, reached out to Sally Voth at the college wondering if we might be interested in hosting a talk with Virginia. Sally introduced Jason to me, and I was an absolute yes. Let's go for it. Although Virginia and I have never met in person, we have exchanged a few emails sharing just a little bit about our interests, and I have taken a few liberties by skimming through her autobiographies to find out more, so that I might share a brief introduction to get us started. I did write it out. So, in trying to create this brief introduction for Ms. Gamba, I was struck by how monumental her life journey has been, a journey that might be characterized as taking advantage of the opportunities in life as they appear in their mysteries, oftentimes not so clear in their meanings or outcomes. I believe it's valuable for all of us to share about our journeys, and when we do, and especially when we reciprocate through our interactions as we're doing today, the seeds of inspiration might be planted for us at any time. Ms. Gamba has a wealth of wisdom and experience to share, much of it framed in global peace building and security. Now, I do have some highlights I'd like to share with the group about Ms. Gamba's career, including that she earned a master's degree, if I'm correct, in strategic studies at the University of Wales. Then she returned to Argentina. She advised and consulted on civil-military relations. Later, she was a member of the Pugwash movement's executive and council membership. That was from 1985 through 1996, and was jointly awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 1995. She's had numerous academic positions, including lecturing at the Department of War Studies at King's College, London University. She also had positions, or held positions, at American University, the University of Maryland School of Public Affairs, the U.S. Army War College, just to name a few. She's been publishing on peace building and security strategies since 1984. At the United Nations, Ms. Gamba worked as the Director of Disarmament, the Assistant Secretary General leading the UN's mandate to identify perpetrators in the use of toxic substances as chemical weapons in Syria, and most recently as Undersecretary General and Special Representative of the Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict. So I want to welcome Ms. Virginia Gamba, and I wonder if you might share with us a little bit about your journey into peace building and security, and your work with the Pugwash conferences, maybe beginning with the important opportunities your mom provided to you growing up, and how her worries about you, I'm especially interested in this, led to an interesting correspondence with the writer and poet Robert Graves. So maybe you could start with a little bit about that.
Yes, of course. I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I hope you can hear me well. I'm right now at the foothill of the Andes in the city of Mendoza, in Argentina. I just gave a talk to all the students in the Department of Law here, and I'm delighted to be able to address all of you today. Yes, I don't think we need, I like what you said, we learn from each other. Solidarity is not just helping each other, but also learning from each other. And each our life's journeys are totally different from another person. We are individuals. God made us individuals. We have our strengths, we have our weaknesses, and we have our path. We don't choose to be born. But once we are born, we are in course. We are on a road that we cannot do anything with except advance. And the way we advance in that road is really our choice. We can do it alone, we can do it angry, we can do it happy, or we can do it with solidarity, which is basically look to your life, to your left, look to your right, and you see other people just like you walking the same path of their lives. And what best way to do it than to helping each other? One way to help each other is to talk about our life's journeys with each other. So yes, I had a wonderful mother, very eccentric. She never was able to finish high school because her father died when she was 14 and she had to go to work. She had no option. And so she self-taught herself English, French, languages. She traveled with my father throughout South America. And in Peru, where I was educated, it was very difficult to find what I liked. I only liked two things in school, which was universal history, i.e. ancient history, and English, which were my two favorite subjects. And as a result of that, my mother tried to help me by buying me books in English that were about these topics. And that's how we came up with Robert Graves and his entire collection of books. And I read all of his books by the time I was 15. By then, my mother was desperate because she didn't know what to do with me. And she wrote to Robert Graves in Mallorca and told him that since she might have produced me, but he produced my brain, and therefore he had to be co-responsible for my education. And she asked his advice. And he was kind enough to send her a letter, and then he started corresponding with me. And it helped me a lot to have a mentor like Robert Graves that gave me great advice at the time when I was very vulnerable. Like all young people between 15 and 20 are very vulnerable. And he really helped me. As a result of all of that, I ended up in a university in the United Kingdom studying Spanish and Latin American studies, which was my first degree. And in that degree, I discovered through history and classical studies and universal studies and the studies of my own region, I discovered that almost everything is born out of war and violence. And then I became obsessed with the understanding of the dynamics of violence, why people are violent, why do we have wars? And eventually it led me to study my master's in strategic studies, which is the study of the way governments use military coercion in pursuit of their foreign policy. Over to you.
Yeah, there was a collective wow or gasp in the group here. If I'm not mistaken, when you returned to Argentina, there was something happening. A conflict was occurring.
Yeah.
And I think,
yeah,
if
it
you
was
want to
difficult. Yeah, I think I will, because I always say that I'm an accidental strategist. And my whole life looks like an accident. I never planned anything. I didn't know my vocation. I didn't have a career path. I had a little bit of a kickstart, but that was it. Everything in my life was like a ladder, and the steps were determined by things that occurred out of my control. That made me think. And I always think that one has a choice. Either you are a prey, a victim of your own life, you're at the mercy of life, or you are in the control of life. And I chose to be in control rather than to feel myself a victim. So I did learn from everything that happened to me, and I understood extraordinary things that occurred, not as a curse, but as some type of divine signal of the way I had to go. So it was like a little bit like I felt at times like St. Paul being kicked off the horse in the road to Damascus. And I've been kicked off my horse so many times, I've forgotten how to count them. But I have learned from each one of my faults what I interpreted as faults. Today, much older, I realized there were opportunities and there was a God that was looking after me and that was pointing me the rough way, because I perhaps need a bit of rough handling, I don't know. So what happened was, yes, I became interested in the dynamics of violence. I went to study strategic studies in Wales, but it was very difficult times. It was the 1980s. Women were not in security studies worldwide. Women were not in defense. In many countries, there was not women in the armed forces or in the police, for that matter. And there were very few civilian women engaged in strategic issues. And least of all, women of the South. I know I was the first woman strategist in Latin America, the first civilian to teach military and defense in Latin America. And it was rough. It was rough to break that barrier, but I did not intend to break it. I just had to do it because it was my path. When I went to Wales to study, I fell in love with strategic studies. I realized only then, at 27 years old, only then, that my real vocation was to be a strategist. My professors thought that I was a natural strategist, which is a way to see the world, which is different from the way others see the world. You see the world as a strategist. You don't become emotionally involved with it. You fly over it like if you were a bird, and you see the problem beneath you. And it allows you to see all the parts of a problem, and you don't get emotionally connected with the problem, so you can analyze it better. And that was the way I thought since I was a little girl. I just did not know that this was strategy. So I discovered the vocation in Wales. I am a natural strategist, and I felt cheated by God because I thought God had made me want to study this, made it possible for me to study in Wales. I paid for it myself. It was very hard. I had to work 7 years to be able to afford the university. And then I thought, God, why are you making me fall in love with this when I can never use it? I'm a Latin American woman. I'm not a member of NATO, so I can never offer my assistance to developed countries. I'm Latin American. There are no women in the military. There are no women in defense. There are no civilians in defense. So why did you show me something that I could not use and make me fall in love with it? And I felt sick. I was so worried. I thought it was perhaps irony of God. I felt betrayed. And I went obviously back to Latin America and I felt sick. And my mother said, you should not worry so much. I said, yes, but I'll never be able to work on my passion. And she said, don't worry so much. Why don't you take a little holiday and go to Argentina? Because we lived in Peru and we had little money, but she paid the ticket. And I had about $100 in my pocket. And I had my aunt in Argentina, so I could stay with her for free. And I left. And when I arrived in Argentina, within 10 days of my arrival, Argentina was in war with the United Kingdom, where I was coming from. So suddenly, I was the only civilian expert in the whole of Argentina that was an expert on British defense policy at the time when my country of birth was in war with my country of intellect. So what it did for me is that it forced me to take a decision. The war was starting. I knew what was going to happen. I knew how to analyze it. And in university and college, you're taught from books of the past. And I thought the real test of a strategist is to analyze a hot war, not one that finished and you know the results of. So I thought if I want to prove to myself that this is my vocation, I will stay in Argentina and analyze the war day by day and prognosticate what will happen the next day or the next week. And that's exactly what I did. I stayed and I had to live off something. I started writing articles in the press, and the press had no information whatsoever because the journalists in Argentina were not prepared to cover an international war with a European power. So I was the only one. Therefore, all my articles were published as editorials. I became famous overnight. And suddenly, after 3 months of war, the whole country knew me, but not only the whole country, but the whole world, because all the news of the world were in Buenos Aires. I was the only one that knew English as well as French and Spanish, so I could deal with the press. And I was independent civilian journalist. And so the real thing that perhaps out of all of this you have to understand is there was an opportunity. I could have just gotten scared. My family in Peru were calling me constantly, scared to death, telling me there's a war, get out, come back to Peru. It's not worth your safety to stay when there's a war in your country. And I refused, thinking if I cannot understand what's happening, then I am not who I believe I am. And it made me. I became very famous. As soon as the war finished, there was a change between the military government to an elected government. Democracy returned. And with the return of democracy, there was urgent a national need to re-educate the military so that they would not take political power. And therefore, you had to professionalize the military, take them out of politics, but you had to give a crash course on how to manage defense to all Congress. And the only person in the whole country that was a civilian that could do that was me. So at 28, I was doing the biggest transition reform of all the institutions of defense into civilian control. Nothing of that I planned. I did not covet any of that. It was not my ambition. I felt it was my duty and my obligation to myself, to my community, and frankly to God, who had put me in that situation, which I had not understood initially. And then I understood his wisdom. He gave me the knowledge. I was frustrated. I went back. My mother sent me on holiday because I was sick. And then war starts. I mean, how can you explain it except as a sign of God? Over to you.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. I think the way that I think you said it very well, and the way that opportunity may present itself, and really it's how we look at or understand the opportunity. Is it something that we're going to take advantage of or let slip by? I'm wondering, and I do, there's a couple of things I would like for everyone to hear about before we get into the questions. Because shortly thereafter, I'm assuming, is the time you started with the Pugwash conferences. So I'm just curious, because this I have not read or don't know, how you became interested in nuclear disarmament. I think that was the end result, I believe, from the Pugwash conferences, and ultimately led to in part a Nobel Peace Prize that you shared with the.
Yes,
if you could talk about that, that would be.
Yeah, it's a little bit tortuous as everything in my life, but it ultimately makes sense. When I was studying strategic studies, one of my courses obviously was weapons of mass destruction and nuclear warfare. And this was the one course I hated. I couldn't sleep every time we had that course, because just thinking of the devastation of the use of a nuclear weapon on any society was just too big to even imagine. And I noticed that my fellow students, all of them were military. By the way, I was the only civilian doing this course in Wales, in the university. All of them didn't seem to care much about it. They were doing exercises, they were doing practices, they were writing, but they were not humanizing it. So one day, I remember in one of these simulations we used to do in the practical part of the courses, people were talking about nuclear deterrence and about the need to fire first if necessary. and mutual assured destruction terms. And I was just looking at them. And then I saw two of my colleagues very happy, saying, oh, I pressed the button first, so I killed 7 million people in your country, so I win. And I thought, my God, what are we doing? I want to cry. I'm crying right now. So the only way I could cope with it is that giving it to God. And I told God at night when I couldn't sleep, I told God, listen, I have to believe that you will give mankind a second opportunity. I have to believe it. And I have to believe that if everybody presses buttons and these things are flying through the air, you are the only one with the power to stop them in midair. And that really helped me pull through. Then I went through a conventional war, a real war, with conventional weapon systems. But the United Kingdom was a nuclear power, and there were nuclear-powered submarines coming in the South Atlantic. And there was, at one point, a scare of the possibility of an attack by England with nuclear bombs in the city of Cordoba, which was a ploy, in a way, in the very hard negotiations that were going on, where they were trying to feint, possible escalations. And that kept in the back of my mind. Afterwards, after the war, when I became very famous talking about wars and about the Falkland Malvinas War, and I wrote 5 books about it in 5 years, I started getting a lot of interest from American universities and British universities. And they kept inviting me to go to conferences to talk about Latin American peace and security. I was becoming world known. And within that space, I was approached by a Professor Kaplan, who was an American professor that belonged to Pugwash. He came to Buenos Aires to meet with me, and he said, listen, we are trying to bring together all the scientists and researchers and engineers that we can, so that across the divide, the east-west divide and the north-south divide, at least scientists can try to make sense and understand each other, understand our defense policies, so as to try to prevent an unwanted escalation into Armageddon. And I then remembered my fear of weapons of mass destruction. I immediately signed up. I said, well, you can count with me, but what can I do? I'm just a Latin American lady, And he says, no, we'll invite you. And they invited me to one of their meetings. I remember it was in Hungary at the time, because they had meetings in both sides of the East-West divide. And both the US and the Soviet Union at the time allowed that exchange of information. So it was protected. It was a protected civilian research and space. And it was, in a way, a confidence-building measure between the sides. And I was invited to that first one in 1985. And when I went there and I started talking, I was the youngest. At the time, I must have been 29 or 30 years old. Everybody else was 50, 60, 70 years old. And so I became a little bit of novelty. And I interacted and I assisted, and then I was co-opted unanimously into the executive committee of the organization at that same date. And I was kept there for 10 years. And so together, all the other scientists from the world, the Americans, the Soviets, the Chinese, there were Indians, there were Israelis, there were a lot of Europeans, there were French, everybody was there. Together we met almost every month in different capitals of the world to discuss ways in which we could coexist and where we could limit weapons of mass destruction. And our efforts, in the end, after about 10 years of that effort, we obtained that France changed its policy about nuclear testing in the South Pacific Islands. And so they actually signed the Test Ban Treaty. And on the basis of that, the organization was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize of 1995 on nuclear proliferation. And because I was one of the 7 members of the executive committee, obviously I was the organization, and 50% of the prize went to us as an organization, and the other 50% to the president of the organization, which was Dr. Joseph Rotblat from Poland. Over to you.
Thank you. I have some questions about your work at the United Nations, but I think maybe we'll take an opportunity to have some questions from the group right now, if that's okay with you. And I'm going to ask maybe Holly, are you okay to ask? I'm going to have Holly ask a question. Is that okay, Virginia?
Of course, everything's
okay. And then
me.
I think some of the questions will bring us around to your work at the United Nations.
Okay, that's fine.
Should I sit down or should I sit up? Okay. Ms. Gamba, I appreciate you spending time with us to answer our questions. My question has to do with the children in armed conflict that you have experience with. And I've worked with children in foster care in different areas, and I notice that public attention focuses on the rescue of children when they've been freed from unsafe environments. But the story usually stops there. And I'm wondering if you know what happens in the quiet years after. Specifically, are there accommodations for the needed long-term trauma-informed care to reduce possible PTSD or CPTSD in our youngest survivors? And also, how can the average citizen contribute to future generations who have their lives changed by consequences they did not create?
That's very good. It's a very good question, Holly. I mean, I spent 8 years on that job. I did not want to take it, by the way, because I was an expert on arms and arms control and weapons of mass destruction. I had just finished doing the cleanup of all the chemical weapons in Syria. And then the new Secretary General called me in and said, listen, I'm changing you. I'm making you under Secretary General in the Department of Children and Armed Conflict. And I objected. I didn't want it. I said, I don't understand. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert on children. I don't know about development. I know nothing of kids. So why do you want me to put me there? And he said, listen, it's about wars. And you are an expert on wars. So you will be able to identify the dynamics of conflict so that you can identify ways in which we could prevent or rescue or protect better the children that are used and abused by armed conflict worldwide. And I was intrigued, I accepted, and I did it for 8 years. And now I can go to your question. I was incredibly frustrated, and I continue to be frustrated because immediately that I started the work, I did my own research. I read everything on the topic that was on that office, everything that had been done in 30 years of work. And I immediately saw the problem. I said, what's the point in rescuing children that have been abused if all you're going to give them is a 3-month post-traumatic care where they do a physical exam, they give them a skill because they don't have a skill, or a minimum education because they've been recruited forcibly by very young, or they were sexually abused very young. And then you give them a 3-month, and then what do you do with them? You know, you send them back to their communities. Do they want to go back to their communities? Are they self-sufficient? You know, who cares about their long-term needs? Who gives them education? And I really, really tried from 2018 onwards to convince all the member states and the big financial organizations of the world that we needed a pool, a fund, a global fund that would be a global fund to sustain long-term the recovery of traumatized children. My idea being that you would have a minimum of 5 years education guaranteed, because it's not your fault that you were recruited or that you were sexually abused or that you were kidnapped. You lost education, you were forced to do things you didn't want to do, you suffered greatly, and then you're rescued and you're told you're not good anymore, you are spoiled goods. And we're just going to, you're trouble in the future because you've been spoiled by life. And so they see the children, society sees these children as the enemies of the future. And I saw it and I thought, this is entirely wrong. The children must be given an opportunity to recover everything they lost and also have the same rights as every other child. So my idea was to treat them equally to all the other children, but recognized that they had special needs. And their needs, in my mind, was a minimum of 5 years education that was speeded, what I call speed education, that I begged for someone to invent so that they could actually complete both primary and high school in less time. I pleaded with universities to try to give these children, once they finish school, scholarships so they could study if they wanted to in careers in college and university. And I thought 5 years of education guaranteed, including money so that they could live. It included a small amount of money to help the communities where they would go back to, so that those communities would also have assistance to be able to absorb them and help them. And then I wanted a guaranteed post-traumatic psychological mental health needs as they emerge through time. But the critical point was that I thought it was cheap, that all we needed to do is grab all the demobilization funds for post-conflict that are applied to adult combatants when they demobilize. There are funds in the World Bank, in the IMF, that exist to support these men and women, adults that have fought and that now stop fighting. But there's never been a fund for children. And so I thought, you could divide that fund that exists and create the opportunities, what I called a global reintegration comprehensive process. Now, I was not heard. I did a lot. I wrote a lot. I did a lot of meetings. I had many countries that supported, but ultimately no one wanted to put money behind such a scheme. Even the organizations that already had money didn't want to divide it between children and adults. I was particularly distressed that no one wanted to minimally recognize that some of the children were also children with disabilities. They were a blind spot that no one wanted to see. So I became very, very frustrated with this, and it led me to personally look and go and talk to children to see what they needed and what would be the best way out. And to this day, I can tell you, you are right. It requires a long-term effort. It requires support, not just to the child, but to the community the child will be inserted to. It requires a whole process of non-discrimination against the fact that the child went through a traumatic experience when he was very young, so that he can be treated equally to other children. And I have started to say that I don't see that happening, and I don't see an appetite for it to happen. And if it happened, I tell you, if it happened, we would change the world, because I have never met more resilient, optimistic, and courageous children as the survivors of armed conflict. These children were optimistic. They could change the world. They relied on themselves. They had survived. They were proud of themselves. And what they wanted to do was to protect others. And when I asked in each region of the world to these children what they needed and wanted the most, they said, we want the right to an education. We want to be educated, and we want to help other children so that to prevent that this happens to them. The solidarity of those children was unmatched. And we, the society of the world, we are throwing away gold dust in not looking to make these children the leaders they were born to do. But I'm sorry, I get very emotional when I talk about this. Over to you, Holly.
Do you have?
I agree with you that I think that these children could be our most valuable citizens for humanitarian aid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're the natural disarmers, the natural child protectors of the future.
Can you share briefly? You said you visited or you spoke with children. Can you share, or do you feel comfortable sharing where most recently you were meeting or talking with children?
I've talked whenever I had the opportunity to go to the field, and that was not always. Not always was I allowed to go to the field because of my rank. Many times security stopped me from going against my will. But whenever I managed to pull it off, I would also ask to see the children. And I've seen children everywhere, from Colombia. I've seen children in Palestine. I've seen children in Central African Republic, in Mali, in Sudan, in South Sudan, in Iraq. I've seen children in Yemen. And of course, in Ukrainian children as well, and Russian children as well. And so I think the last time I had any interactions with children were in relationship to the Palestine issue and with the Ukraine issue. But I retired from the UN in 31st of July last year. And since then, all I'm doing is writing books and publishing books, and then, running for Secretary General. Over to you.
Do you think there's a children's book in your future? A writing of a children's book? I'm just curious with your passion for...
No, I've written 40 books already. All of those books were about peace and security and proliferation and arms control and human security. I've written 2 autobiographical books. Some of them have got anecdotes on children. My latest one, which I published now in December, is only in Spanish. Unfortunately, all the other ones are in English and Spanish, but it's only in Spanish. And there I have a lot of anecdotes from my UN years with children, and I talk about children. I don't see myself writing a children's book, but I do see myself being an advocate for children, because I think they really are alone. And I would love to do more work with 2 issues that people fail to see. And they fail to understand that we fail to understand that the world is seeing a huge increase in the trafficking of people and slavery of people across borders. And the huge majority of the biggest majority of that group of people is children. And there are no statistics, no data, no research. So we have no amount that we can see. But I'm obsessed with bringing attention to the trafficking of children, one. And the second thing that I'm really obsessed is with changing the value of education in people's minds. Because for me, education is more strategic than defense. So if I write, it's going to be more anecdotes. It won't be a children's book. Children don't need children's book. Children just needs to be heard. Everything I know is from what children told me in the field. That's the sum of everything for me. It's not my learning. It's what I've been learning by listening to the children and the affected communities of the world, what they aspire to be, what they want. Over to you.
Thank you. We have a question from Patrick, which I've shared on the screen. Yeah.
First, I'd like to say thank you for your work on nuclear proliferation. I'd like to be a physicist in the future, and it's something I really worried about, obviously, and something that you and all the people you know and your colleagues have given me a lot of hope that I can do that, to be a physicist and, not have it, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with new technology. Kind of in that vein, this is where this question is kind of coming from. Over the course of your career, have you noticed any changes in the culture of diplomacy? Do you think, on the whole, that representatives in the UN are learning from past mistakes?
Well, that's a big question, but I take very much. I would really encourage you to continue being a physicist, and I would encourage you to do it with ethical and be sure of yourself. Have principles and show that you have principles, and don't be afraid of them, and you'll do fine. I think on diplomacy, frankly, there is a huge change, because diplomacy used to be a very quiet exercise. And if it worked well, it could really deter, stop, prevent the course of a crisis. It could deflate. I could find common ground between parties to conflict, working quietly. And diplomats were valued, not for what they really said publicly, but what they undertook privately. so that they could improve the understanding between peoples and to offer creative solutions for win-win strategies in any contemporary challenge that they met. But that has changed. And today, diplomacy is not a quiet exercise. It's full of prima donnas. It's not courteous like it used to be. It has become so politicized, and it's used now as a tool that is integrated to other state tools, such as narratives, media control, military, economic, social pressure points. It has become the appendix of a narrative of politics, and not a quiet solution, a quiet safe space to discuss big problems. So yes, I think it has changed, and it is really not valued, and I think we need it back. I think on the UN, you have to understand the UN system. The UN system is not made up of diplomats. I'm not a diplomat, was never trained as a diplomat. I think the problem is the representatives of member states to the UN, they rotate every 4 years. So they don't have much memory of what they did during the UN years. For UN personnel, which is the formal personnel of the UN, some of them are officials, some of them are administrative. They're not all career diplomats or ex-career diplomats. They all depends in which function that they're put to serve, that they would have more or less experience to undertake a lessons learned exercise on how diplomacy works. So I really think that today we're doing very poorly on diplomacy as a tool for global understanding and for peace, both at the UN and outside of the UN. Over to you.
Thank you.
As a follow-up to what you just said, do you have, do you have a vision or an idea of some other format or some other way to bring people together across the globe that would exist, like the United Nations, but would meet those needs that you say the UN is not meeting? Do you have a vision of that, or can it be done within the UN as it exists?
No, of course it can be done. When I'm Secretary General, you'll see it at work. I mean, you just need to know your business. I think the problem is for many, many years, the system, the global order of the world is been managed from a member state-centered policy, right? So we live in a diplomatic world, whether it's the UN or otherwise in regional organizations, that only identifies as legal states. So we live in a world of 193 states, but we also live in a world with 4 southern nations and God knows how many thousands of communities. So I think the problem is one of a changing world order where we have to take decisions, who you need to talk to, who must discuss with whom. And I think civil society has been left out of diplomacy and of regional organizations and of the United Nations, really left out. And that's why civil society is organizing itself to be able to meet these bridging needs. But they're not well organized, they're not well coordinated, they go more around substance. So you have a community of scientists, you have a community of engineers, but then you have religious groups that are trying to accommodate, to be bridge builders. There's many NGOs that are trying to work collectively across borders with their counterparts, but they really don't have the support of states and they don't have the support of regional and international organizations. I think what needs to happen is they must have that space. And I think the UN, as well as regional organizations in the Americas, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, even in the Middle East, they must grow up. They have to provide a space where they understand none of us has the power to transform the world and help in the well-being of our societies. None of us can do it alone. We need private-public partnerships and we need civil society partnerships with states and governments and regional organizations. Only all of us working together can we actually bridge the gap. But yes, there are many, many organizations that already are working in this way, but they are substantially different. So you can do it through churches, you can do it through one denomination or interfaith groups that are trying to do this. But you can also do it through NGOs, both local NGOs and substantive. There's some on children. There's some that are trying to pursue peace building exercises, confidence building exercises between communities, developmental needs, sistering programs between communities to help in development. But nothing is really methodical, and nothing is really nothing is a golden standard that we could model other items on. So for me, it's virgin land, and I would welcome all of you to think creatively of how to do it. Over to you.
Thank you. We have a lot of questions, but I want to give it. If anyone in the room has a particular question, I'm happy to give you that opportunity. Okay. There was a question on the slide from Jennifer. I think Jennifer's in the meeting, on the Zoom meeting. But Jennifer wrote, in your June 2025 statement on the prevention of genocide, you stated, hatred is expressed very often in the form of hate speech. And Jennifer asked, can you share examples of practices and strategies that have proven most successful in combating hate speech at both micro and macro levels?
This is a really sore point. I was, as you know, I was asked to be interim special advisor on genocide and hate speech for about 10 months because they couldn't get anybody to accept the job. So I was doing it concurrently with Children Armed Conflict. It was a very difficult time for me. And it was a very difficult moment as well on the increase in hate speech globally. And I saw it. I tried to prevent it. I tried very much to change the let's say the way that the speech writers were engaging, even in the UN, where the emphasis is always on trying to balance language out. So if you talk bad of one thing, you talk bad of another thing. If you talk good of one thing, you talk good of the other thing. And in my mind, there is no excuse for hate speech. It can never be balanced out with anything. There's no justification for terrorism. There can never be a justification for an act of terror of any type, for any reason. It can never be justified. So I think the problem with hate speech today is that it's on the increase and that no one is doing anything about it. And I get really, really concerned because the closest I can think of what I feel today, that I see in the daily narratives, in the press, in politicians, even sometimes in religious leaders, is and communities. Because I'm a military historian, I recognize the same patterns as those that happened before the First World War, not before the second, before the first, and it scares me. It's like we're falling into a pit. We're seeing more and more anti-Semitism. We are also seeing Islamophobia, but the anti-Semitism we're seeing is incredible. There's more and more attacks on and speeches asking for the symbols and the things that are valued to a people's culture to be destroyed or to be ignored or to be depreciated. And nothing offends more a culture than if you attack their value system. And that's true for everybody in the planet. We're all the same, but we're differentiated by culture, and we have to respect each other. So it's unfortunate what I'm saying. I have not seen very successful ways in which to prevent hate speech in the last year and a half that I have been in that job, and I left the job. And that would be one of the first things I'm going to tackle if I make it to Secretary General, is to have a strategy. Now, I do believe that first we have to recognize we have a problem. Second, we need to train ourselves. We need capacity building measures that would be a really good, practical, not goody-goody two-shoes, politically correct manuals. No, we need practical manuals that can be modeled and given to teachers, professors, media people, so that they learn that there are some words that are charged with hatred, that they might not even understand, that by using them, they are inciting hatred for a specific group or culture or religion. So I really think there's a lot of ignorance and there's a lot of manipulation in the narratives. And the ignorance with manipulation is a terrible combination. So I do think capacity building, training, and rolling out standards. And I would love to do workshops with journalists, workshops with professors, workshops with the teachers, and then start rolling out in cities, particularly in those cities that are most prone to start looking for divides through hate speech. And it's not just religious or cultural, it can also be rich versus poor, haves and have-nots. Everything is dividing us. It's as if our past divides us and the future is the only thing that can unite us, but no one is out there to give us a vision of a common future where we all have a place and something to give to it. So no, there is no best practices right now, and I'm not seeing much happening, and I am really worried. Over to you.
All right, thank you. This question comes from Artyom, who is an international student from Kharkiv and has seen how in reality international laws and policies often seem unable to prevent suffering or stop aggression. Based on your experience, why do these international systems so often fall short? And what would you need to change for them to become truly effective?
Okay.
I guess, or what would you suggest?
Yeah, and I get where our team is coming. That's something that worries a lot of young people all over the world because they see that there are norms. I mean, there is international law, there's international humanitarian law, there's the rules of war. All of this has been written, 80 years ago. It's on a piece of paper, sometimes 50 years ago. There are the Convention on the Right of the Child, the most universally ratified convention in the world, but I will see it differently. One thing is a norm on a convention, and we can rest easy that this will not go away. I mean, once you have created such a convention and those rights, they're there to stay forever. The question is not the piece of paper in which everybody has agreed what is a right and what is a wrong. The question is how you're going to implement that. And if you do research, as college students, you can do research, you can see that even in the most widely ratified conventions, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but also the generics of international humanitarian law, even in those, the governments that have signed those documents and have said that they value them, if you look at the national policies, they have not yet implemented them in national law. So one of the big problems is that it's fine to have global conventions and rights, but they're worthless. They're just pieces of paper unless the governments fine-tune their own national legislation, and they also penalize and criminalize those rights that have been wronged in the national legislation. And then on top of that, you must have an operational guide on how you're going to roll it out and make it effective. So it's not for a lack of not having norms or not having the right norms or the right international laws, it's the way in which they're not being implemented. Now, the international system is weird. The United Nations is often seen as a global police, and it is not. It is the opposite of that. The United Nations is non-operative. It does not have its own defense forces. It can never send a peace group to anything. They can only do what the Security Council mandates through a Security Council resolution that passes. It's blocked. Security Council has been blocked for years into coming up with resolutions that are that give the United Nations the mandate to go out and observe or generate a ceasefire or do anything in a situation of conflict. So the UN does not take decisions of this type. It depends on the member states to produce resolutions and then ask the UN to engage. And even then, like in Haiti, for example, you can get the resolution, but then no one wants to give the money or the troops to go and do what the resolution asks because people are scared of getting killed or of it being too expensive. So I think it's really sad that those of us that understand international laws and international humanitarian law expect to see like a punishment if it's broken, but who's going to do it? When we live in a world of 193 equal sovereign states. So there is not a supra-governmental authority that decides what's right and wrong and can have the means, the resources, and the capacity to go and punish those that are not following what is on a piece of paper. I don't know if I make myself clear. It's not the ideal world, but it's not something that the UN can and cannot do. So over to you.
Right. Thank you. I think we have time for a couple questions, maybe. This is a little bit different. This was from Leaf. In your work with conflict prevention, do you see environmental destruction, an example of fossil fuel infrastructure projects on indigenous or rural lands, as a driver of instability? If so, what strategies have been used to de-escalate struggles like this?
That's again, you give me really complicated questions. But let me try to be very succinct because we have little time. But I think we have to understand that from the very beginning of time, of recorded history, humankind really has had a need for food, for air, for water to survive, right? So territory is important, not for its own sake, but for what it meant for humankind's survival. Over time, territory also was imbued, I think, with political values and with principles of sovereignty. And yet, the basis of life still is the ability to obtain food, have air, and have access to water. So I think what needs to happen is we need to depoliticize the value of territory so that it can become a common ground for humankind and not a great divider of humankind. And I think the past, again, will always divide us. That's why the rights of these people, the rights of that people, for me, that's division. It just generates tension and conflict. But I think the future can unite us. So if we can build a vision of a common future where we all have room to live with each other and to grow, I think this still is the best way to de-escalate conflict, to try to find a common vision that is acceptable to all. And I think the problem with the discussions on the convention on climate change is that it's too big. You have to cut it in portions. You have to have components. You have to work on components that are practical and pragmatic in both adaptation, on resilience, on mitigation, on prevention. They're components. But if you see it in such a huge, vast exercise as it is now, there also is a high possibility of it becoming very politicized. It can become a divider and not a unifier. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I think we're out of time, perhaps. And I do want to thank you for your time and your sharing today. I really appreciate it. Maybe we can give do you want to say something, Sally? Oh, okay. No, one question.
Yeah.
Real quick.
Hello to another University of Wales alumna. I wanted to know, how has the Trump administration affected international relations, and how long do you think before that can be mended for future diplomats?
Okay. Well, fair enough. I don't think it is the Trump administration, frankly. You will be disappointed by my answer. What I'm noticing in presidents such as President Trump, and he's not the only one, there's several others that have got the same type of profile, is the trend that they represent. And I think over the last 5 years, I've noticed that people all over the planet are sick and tired of political parties. And so this gives a space for opportunist people that want to generate a different type of space. And the people are allowing it because they're sick and tired of political parties, being old and old-fashioned and not up to point. And so it's allowing personalities to come through, to come forth. Like I say, it's not just the United States. In the United States, it's expressed as President Trump, but in other countries, it's expressed by other types of presidents that are of the same ilk. So I think what we need to do is to recognize that this is not a person that seizes power. It is a representation of a desire of people. And the desire of people is to a change. They cannot know what change they want. They just want the change. So they go along with whatever, is pushed. And it is true. It is this type of new thinking and new acting, not just in the US, but in other countries, is leading to a deep sense of insecurity and safety. No one knows what happens next. It has broken all the norms. And so it won't finish with either the demise of the change of governments. It has to do with a deep political culture. We need to resolve the political cultures of the world. And I really think it's the end of an era and the beginning of another era. And I think the social pact between the peoples and political parties and who is in and who is out, and what I call the private-public partnerships, including civil society, has to emerge as a new basis upon which we can construct our democracies. But until that happens, I'm afraid we will have to go with this pendulum between far right, far left, some in the middle, some isolationists, some interventionists. There's not much we can do about it except try to produce the alternative. Over to you.
Thanks.
All right. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time, Virginia.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.